Okay, the work I do, which possibly none of you are familiar with, is in Yemen. I've been working in earth architecture and mud brick in particular ever since I graduated from my School of Architecture in London. So it's not a new terrain. And I first started with Hassan Fathi in Cairo, and I have a publication on him and his work that came out recently, 2017. And but I've been working in Yemen since 1980, 1981, when I was working with the United Nations Human Settlements Department of the Economic Commission for Western Asia, now known as ESCWA. In 2017, I established with colleagues in Hadramaut the Doan Architecture Foundation, and most of the work that has been done, which I'm showing you today, whether it's of rehabilitation and refitting prior to the war or the post-war reconstruction that was done in 2019-21, was funded by the Prince Claus Fund Cultural Emergency Response, who have been a constant partner with us there. And more recently, the British Council Cultural Protection Fund came in on 2 of the recent projects. Just to orient those of you who are we're all busy with Ukraine now, but Yemen is still undergoing a war. And this is Yemen, which is in the southwest corner of Arabia, right on the Red Sea and the area known as the Mandab Pass. And Aden, as you might recall, was a protectorate for over 100 years, since Victorian times, was taken over as a station for coaling station to India. The northern part of Yemen, and these were 2 separate states, was at the time run by an imam and ruled later by the Ottomans. The British stayed in southern Yemen, where I'm working, till 1967, but at the moment, of course, it's one country divided by war and factions, but it's under the same country of the United Arab Emirates. My work is in this large region called Hadramaut, which borders here on the Mahra, and that in turn borders on Dhofar and Oman. And the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia is in this area. Okay, Hadramaut is also one of the, as you can see, the largest governorates. You can see the other governorates in different colors. The color mustard denotes the areas I have documented, worked in, and published in this book, which recently came out in a new edition called The Architecture of Yemen and its Reconstruction. This is an idea of a part of the map of Hadramaut. Wadi Hadramaut is one of the most fertile wadis in Arabia. It has an ancient civilization, and with it developed this incredible architecture that is still being built and used. So we're not talking of history as something of the past. History lives in the present, which is wonderful, and it's why I've been working and advocating this architecture as not only a cultural heritage, frankly, but as an architecture for the future. I'm an architect and not an historian. The areas you see here, this is Wadi Doan, the name after which our foundation has taken. And Wadi Doan is a tributary of Wadi Hadramaut. These are the principal towns in Wadi Hadramaut that I'm going to show. Sayoun is, I'm not showing it, Sayoun is the capital of the interior. I'll be showing Shibam, the city famous for its mud brick skyscrapers, and termed by Freya Stark as the Manhattan of the desert. And then we have Tarim here, which is the spiritual capital. Sayoun was the commercial capital, Tarim was the spiritual capital and still is, and home to many like the rest of Hadramaut, Sufis that they call saints, shrines and practices. The areas that you see in red are the areas where we have intervened and worked over the past, since 2007. It's been a while. Prior to that, I was working in Shibam and Tarim, and I did a lot of research throughout the country on the building techniques. I'm going to go quite fast because I don't think, considering the time, I'm going to be able to show all the materials. So I'm just going to give you an idea. This is the city of Shibam I was talking about. And as you can see, that's the sun-dried bricks that go up to 7 and 8 stories in height in a town that was built over 200 to 300 years ago, but is in continuous renovation. And this is the other town of Masna'a and Wadi Doan that we first started working in. And what you're looking at now is the restored facade of the Masna'a means a fort, and it's known as Masna'a Taura, the name of the area. And this was the foothold of the governors of Wadi Doan during the time when the British were still there, and up until 67. After that, the sultanates all broke down and we had a republic. So this was subjected to severe flooding in 2006 and 7, and that was one of the first projects we intervened in. Our work includes reconstruction, as you can see in this entire area here, and in this area here, which is, and then we consolidated and rehabilitated all the walls and the back parts, and this is some of the interiors, and this is one of the craftsmen helping in renovating and repairing the woodwork inside. And this is one of the rooms inside as it was before. Shibam happened to be a few projects away, but I'll talk about it now. 2 houses, a house, which is this one here, had completely collapsed, and it was reconstructed. And as you can see here, they laid the foundation, the house was built up again. And whatever work we do a lot of surveys, we document, we take notes, we interview the people, and they normally are involved in the process. So this is the reconstructed, it was a simple house owned by a master builder, and it was in 4 stories, 2 had collapsed on top, and this is the house here after it was renovated, after it was rebuilt, sorry. And that's the facade of Shibam, southern facade. That's a view from the interior of the house that had collapsed that I took overlooking the central square of the mosque, just to give you an idea to appreciate the scale and the architecture we're talking about, that each of these houses was and still is a single unit, a single family, a single household, a single extended family. The other projects we worked on were outside, just on the eastern part, and these had suffered tremendously after the spate floods that occurred. This was one of the oldest mosques in Ainat called Masjid al-Faqih, and the repairs were done, and some considerable structural, we do structural repair. It's not about just touching up or decorating facades. The entire mud brick coursing, which is made in 5 or 6 layers of mud brick and lime mixtures and constitution, is completely stripped and redone all over again. As you can see here, this is the mud render, this is some of the whitewash, the lime being applied, Noura, and these are the first stages. And the Noura is a very glossy and thick material in the end. It is almost marbleized and then polished with stone. It looks a lot like the marmarino that they do in Italy. These are the interiors of shrine that existed, but it's also used as a visiting place. Shrines are used culturally and traditionally. A shrine in Hadramaut has a dome, and therefore it's known as Qubbat. This one, for example, is Qubbat Bawazir, i.e. the dome of Bawazir. Bawazir was a saint who originally came from, or they is believed to be a saint. He was a scholar, an Islamic scholar, who came from Iraq and established or propagated the Sunni religion there when most of Hadramaut followed the Abadi. Wasn't religion, sorry, it's school in Islam. So they thought they now are Sunnis after they originally were Abadis, which is another form of school like Shia and Sunni, etc. What you can see here is the back arches of the prayer area, the arcade. Some of the columns had buckled in, so we constructed this entire wall here like a lateral brace in order to enforce this area of the prayer hall here. And these are two different facades. And here we were consolidating the vaulted areas by inserting tie rods in the walls or replacing these and continuing with these this other form of support that is created through spanning the rods and building in a formwork, a type of a formwork that serves as a support for the vaults. This was another fort that we worked on and did a good part of reconstruction to some of the walls that needed also in some cases to be consolidated. And you can see here the 4 stories. This is in Wadi Doan. And this was one of the last projects we finished before the war started. As you can see here, this external area of the fort was still in ruinous state after this area was completed. And here you can see some 3-dimensional
Salma, I wonder if we've had a question. I wonder if this is a good moment to address it. John has asked, could you comment on the cause of the collapses, of these collapses, and the types of crises that are experienced in this area?
This was to do with the spate floods that I mentioned. The area of Hadramaut is subject to the same monsoon rains and flooding that they get. And these floods tend to affect particularly areas that are deserted and not lived in. And a lot of the original inhabitants left after 1967 or the 70s when you had a socialist government. And one of the causes of these houses becoming fragile is that they are not being maintained. So if you go back and you look at the type of neglect, desertion, the spate floods, and the fact that they have given up on many of their original cisterns that accumulated the rainwater, not in Doan, but in Wadi Hadramaut itself. And this has also affected the flooding that is occurring. We get spate floods that block the entire area, and water fills the wadi up to 2 meters in height. So this is in an area that is normally dry and arid, but we get these seasonal thrusts of flooding. Does that answer the question for now?
I hope John will let me know if it answers his question.
It has nothing to do with, I mean, we were confronting these issues, the fact that a lot of these houses were deserted. The owners, the original owners, have immigrated and live in Saudi Arabia, in Eastern Africa. Some live in Indonesia. Some live in the States. The people of Yafa are all in the States. The people of certain areas of Hadramaut, the earlier migrations happened to Cardiff and various areas. So a lot of migration takes place from this area. These people are people who migrated, have been traveling and migrating for a very long time. And this is because they are traders and they worked also. I mean, this is the area where the incense routes comes through. I don't have time to cover so much, but we'll be happy to answer a lot of your questions. And I must admit that all has been documented and published. I've done 2 or 3 books on Yemen.
Can I just say to everyone, please do ask questions. You can either use the chat or you can use the question and answer button.
Would you like me to continue, or is that enough?
Hang on, we have another question, and oh no, that was the one. Yes, no, that's it, thank you. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so since the war in 2014, and I suppose you all know that the war was waged against Yemen and is still ongoing, we have had to deal with a lot of this after the damage occurred. This occurred, the work we did since then was either in Shibam, where we restored the gateways and the walls or the sur surrounding the town that was blown up. And more drastically was the fact that most of the tombs and mosques that had domes or vaults in them, or that were used as tombs, where some of these scholars were buried, were destroyed by Al-Qaeda, or those who professed and called themselves Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula or something like this. They came in, sometimes they detonated a complete shrine and dome and walked away. And so this was serious work of reconstruction, serious work of investigation, but we were helped by the community. And these posters were prepared and presented to the Wholesome Global Award. And we received, for the work we did in the post-war construction, we received the Silver Award, the Wholesome Silver Award for the Middle East and Africa. And that was recent. But I mean, there's a lot of imagery and a lot of material. And I've just selected one project to show you very quickly today of what reconstruction means. More importantly is that this work would not be possible without the assistance, involvement, and full engagement of the master builders of Hadramaut and the craftsmen who work with us. These are the real people behind the work and working very closely with us. Shaklanza Mosque was a very old mosque that I had seen when I first started going to Hadramaut. You can see a kind of an aerial view of this in what has become a desert location. This mosque was deserted. It was a beautiful mosque that I saw in the late 70s when I first, sorry, what am I talking about? I'm lost in time. It was in, I'll come back to the date. I think it was in, definitely was in the 80s, in the late 80s, 87, yeah, 87 seems like such a long time ago. Anyhow, this mosque had several domes, and the severe damage to begin with was from the desertion and neglect of a town, essentially, that was built around it. after some after a drought that had occurred in the area and caused some migration. Most of the destruction of the war area happened in the surrounding vicinity, but we took advantage of this happening and decided to work on the mosque again because it was a place and reconstruct it. And that was a very encouraging and reassuring process. And also because this mosque employed baked bricks as well as stone. So we removed most of the materials of the area that was damaged, and we recycled all the material and cleaned it up and kept the sections that were still sturdy of the structure in place, made some more mud brick from the mud that was removed, and started reconstructing the arches. And here's one of our builders. And the domes that are constructed in baked bricks. So baked bricks, stone, and sun-dried mud brick were used. And we discovered that there's this material that is no longer used, which is a damp-proof course that is very effective and is still known in Oman, that is called sarouj. Sarouj is actually made from crushed baked bricks mixed with lime, noura, treated lime, and then used as a very thick cover on for the walls that you see here. And then the noura coats start to come in, and this was the restored interior of the mosque. We also restored the cistern that was there, and that's an aerial view. We have many volunteers working with us, ladies as well, and which is very refreshing. And they all came from the School of Architecture in Mukalla. Young architects. And here's the master builder who worked with us and was supervising the other master builders on the site, and members of my foundation. Abdurrahman, who's the general site engineer, started off as our site architect, and our site architect here, and some degrees that they asked us to give them after they did the training for 2 seasons. So this is essentially what I'm going to show today related to post-destruction, the impact of the work, the fact that this work gives a lot of encouragement and spirit to the people there in recovering most of their cultural heritage. We worked on some 12 buildings, I think, to recover in the last 3 or 4 years. And now we're looking for more funding for setting up an institute where we can train builders essentially from the area and work with architects coming from Europe as well, in order to develop a very sophisticated system for building and reconstruction. That's all I'm going to talk about. I know I've showed a lot of images and haven't said very much, but I don't think time allows otherwise. So I'll take any questions.
Okay. Salma, there's a question from Dr. Saeed Ararifi, who says, is there any effect on the archaeological heritage since 2014? And if so, who has destroyed them? Has it been Houthis or other groups?
Well, frankly, there's a very efficient archaeological setup in Sana'a that has been documenting and a lot of the monuments that have been targeted. And yes, there is a large amount, and you can get hold of this by writing, I'll have to remember the name because they have these very long acronyms, but it was run by a colleague who unfortunately passed away because he was an excellent element. Who has targeted these? Was I asked who targeted these? Whether it was who was suggested?
Houthis. Is it damaged by Houthis?
But I mean, I'm sorry, but essentially, you know, this war is being hit by bombs and air from other countries outside Yemen. Not by drones from the Houthis. The Houthis are sending the drones elsewhere. I don't think that the Houthis are looking at destroying their own archaeological heritage. They have no interest in this. Okay. Or in destroying Sana'a for that matter, because Sana'a is another very essential. Look, Shibam and Sana'a are both on the World Heritage List, yes? I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to mention all of this. But it's easy to look it up. And there's a problem. When you write and you publish books, you kind of don't feel responsible for having to relay this. I'm not very articulate in talking so much about this work. And fine. I don't think architects are. Okay. But Sana'a has been targeted, and this is very serious. And we know that it's been targeted by planes.
Right. Actually, one of our participants, Nimalka, has suggested that the acronym you want is MWATNA. That might be the one.
No, there is an M. It's the museum. I tell you what it is. It's the museums and Center for Museums. The problem is it's about museums, manuscripts, and archaeological. So I'm sorry, it's one of them. I cannot. I mean, I know that the one for the historic city presentation is Gofsi. If my assistant was here, she would have immediately come to the rescue. But
don't worry.
But go on.
Okay.
It's GOAMM or something, or GOAAM. Anyway, go on. You won't lose it. And they have they have a website, and you can get in touch with the person responsible there. And it's very sad that, as I said, the previous one who had excellent relationships and contacts all over the country. And it's from them that we got the information for the targeted areas in Hadramaut. Okay.
Okay, and just one last question before we move on. This is from Daniele Vadala from the Ministero della Cultura, and here in Italy. And the question is concerning the difference in the plastering of the buildings. Sometimes the buildings are whitewashed, and other times they're earth. Is this a restoration choice?
No. The thing is, I mean, it could be a restoration choice, but it's a very interesting question. It's a good question. I tell you why. Because normally, the only buildings that you see in white in a town or a city traditionally were the public buildings, a mosque, the palace, the central hall. The rest of all the buildings were not covered in Noura, which is the thick whitewash, except in areas that needed protection or damp-proof coursing. And this was in the roofs of the buildings of Shibam and in the lower levels up to 1.5 meters to 2 meters. These are the areas that are in direct contact with water. Now, in the case, for example, of the one of Qaran Majid, one of the last forts that I showed that was restored, I said before the war, That is a very savvy question. Yes, it was not all covered in Noura, and I was against it personally because originally it was just covered in thick layers of plaster, mud plaster. But they asked me specifically to have it covered in Noura because it would be better for its protection, and that there I couldn't resist any longer.
Okay, thank you very much, Salma.